The year is 2026. Nicolás Maduro sits in a detention cell in Brooklyn, and the world is calling it justice. But here's what they're not telling you. This wasn't just a military operation. This wasn't just diplomacy. The handcuffs that clicked shut in January 2026, they were forged over a decade ago, piece by piece, by the most catastrophic economic implosion in modern Latin American history. Picture this. You're standing on an ocean of oil. You have reserves that dwarf Saudi Arabia. You've got Caribbean beaches, mineral-rich mountains, and a population that once lived better than most of South America. And then, somehow, you manage to delete your entire economy. You don't just go bankrupt, you erase 80% of your GDP in 10 years. You turn a cup of coffee into a $3 million purchase. You make your currency so worthless that people literally wallpaper their homes with it. Today, we're not just talking about an arrest, we're conducting a forensic autopsy of the economic suicide that brought down a dictator. This is the story of how Venezuela's economy became Maduro's executioner. Let's dive in.
To understand why Maduro is behind bars today, we need to rewind to 2013. He inherits power from Hugo Chavez, and with it, he inherits 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. That's the largest petroleum deposit on planet Earth, bigger than the Saudis, bigger than Russia. It's a geological jackpot that should have made every Venezuelan wealthy beyond measure. But here's the economic trap that nobody talks about. Oil wealth is a double-edged sword. When you're pumping black gold 24/7, your currency becomes insanely strong. That makes imports dirt cheap. Why would you grow tomatoes in Venezuela when you can buy them from Colombia for pennies? Why manufacture cars when you can import Hondas for less than it costs to build them locally? So Venezuela stopped producing, they stopped farming, they stopped manufacturing. They became a one-trick economy. Pump oil, sell oil, import everything else. As long as oil was trading at $100 per barrel, the party never stopped. It was champagne and caviar, subsidized housing, and cheap gasoline for everyone. But Maduro didn't just inherit oil dependency, he inherited a broken machine. Years earlier, in a moment of political arrogance that would seal the nation's fate, the government had fired nearly 20,000 petroleum engineers and geologists from PDVSA, the state oil company. Their crime? They went on strike. They were replaced with political loyalists who could chant revolutionary slogans but couldn't maintain a high-pressure oil rig if their lives depended on it. By the time Maduro took office, the infrastructure was already decaying. Pipelines were leaking, refineries were rusting, pumps were failing. But he needed money to maintain power, to pay off generals, to fund social programs that kept people loyal. So instead of investing in repairs, he raided the oil company like a personal piggy bank. Need cash for a political rally? Take it from PDVSA. Need to buy military loyalty? Take it from PDVSA. The maintenance budget? Deleted. Here's the first domino to fall. Production collapse. When Maduro took office in 2013, Venezuela was pumping nearly 3 million barrels per day. By 2020, that number had cratered to a pathetic 337,000 barrels. By the time of his arrest, they were barely keeping above 800,000 on a good day. Think about what that means. Imagine you own a bakery. You stop buying flour, you fire all the experienced bakers, you sell the ovens for scrap, and then you act shocked when there's no bread to sell. That's the Maduro oil doctrine in a nutshell. He killed the golden goose, deep-fried it, and then wondered why it stopped laying eggs. But when the oil money dried up in 2014 after global prices crashed, surely he cut spending, right? Surely he tightened the belt. Oh, you sweet, naive soul. No, he did something far, far worse.
The year is 2014. Oil prices have collapsed. The government ATM is running on fumes. But Maduro has billions in obligations, social programs, subsidies, debt payments, and most importantly, military salaries. A normal leader would make tough choices, cut spending, raise revenue, negotiate with creditors. Maduro looked at the central bank and said,
fire up the printers. This wasn't ordinary inflation. This was hyperinflation on a scale that makes economics textbooks look like children's fairy tales. Let me give you the numbers because they're genuinely difficult to comprehend. In 2013, inflation was 56%, painful but manageable. By 2015, it hit 180%. By 2016, it exploded to 254%, and then the dam completely shattered. In 2018, the IMF estimated inflation reached 130,000%. Some credible estimates for early 2019 put it over 300,000%. Let me put that in perspective for you. Imagine you wake up Monday morning and eggs cost $1. By Friday afternoon, those same eggs cost $3,000. Prices weren't changing by the year or even the month. They were changing by the hour. Waiters in restaurants stopped printing menus with prices because by the time you finished your appetizer, the price of your main course had doubled. The currency, the bolivar, became a sick joke. It was literally cheaper to use cash as toilet paper than to buy toilet paper with cash. People started crafting handbags and artwork out of bills because the craft value exceeded the face value. I'm not exaggerating. There are photographs of this. And what was Maduro's explanation for this economic catastrophe? Did he admit the printing press was the problem? Absolutely not. He declared economic warfare. He blamed shopkeepers for price gouging. He blamed the CIA. He blamed capitalist parasites. He even suggested electromagnetic attacks from space. He sent soldiers into stores to force price controls. Sell this television for $10, the military would demand. So the shopkeeper would sell the TV for $10, and then he'd have no money to restock. The shelves went empty. This is the second domino, the destruction of trust. An economy runs on one fundamental principle, trust. Trust that this paper in your hand will be worth something tomorrow. Trust that if you sell a product today, you can buy food next week. Maduro set that trust on fire. He turned every economic transaction into a game of hot potato. People would spend their entire paycheck within hours of receiving it, buying anything they could find, tires, rice, cooking oil, because holding currency was like holding a melting ice cube. In 2016, a grim joke started circulating in Caracas. They called it the Maduro diet. The punchline, it makes you skinny but not healthy. It wasn't funny, but when you're starving, gallows humor is the only thing left. According to university studies, in 2016 alone, nearly 75% of Venezuelans lost an average of 19 pounds, not from gym memberships or wellness programs, from skipping meals, from eating once a day, from feeding their children and going hungry themselves. This is the third domino, the weaponization of scarcity. When the economy collapsed and hyperinflation destroyed purchasing power, supermarket shelves became barren wastelands. But the government found a solution, or rather, a weapon. They created something called clap boxes, local supply and production committees. These cardboard boxes containing subsidized food became the most powerful political tool in the country. On paper, it sounds humanitarian. In reality, it was a leash. If you protested against the government, no box for you. If you didn't sign the party registry, no box for you. If your neighborhood voted opposition, maybe the delivery truck mysteriously breaks down that week. But the economic crime goes deeper. Remember Alex Saab, Maduro's financial fixer who was eventually arrested and extradited? Investigations revealed a scheme so cynical it takes your breath away. The government was importing low-quality food, often barely fit for human consumption, at massive markups. They were buying powdered milk from Mexico with virtually no nutritional value, billing the Venezuelan treasury millions and pocketing the difference. While Venezuelan children were fainting in classrooms from malnutrition, regime insiders were getting rich off the very hunger they created. They turned starvation into a business model. Think about the level of moral bankruptcy that requires. You destroy the agricultural sector so people can't grow food, you destroy the currency so they can't buy food, and then you say, "Don't worry, we'll feed you if you obey." This economic crime accomplished something that opposition parties never could. It broke the spirit of the working class. You can't organize a revolution on an empty stomach. You can't protest when your child is crying for hunger. When a building is on fire, you don't debate architectural theory, you jump out the window. By 2018, Venezuela wasn't just burning, it was an inferno. And Venezuelans made a choice. If they couldn't vote Maduro out with ballots, they'd vote with their feet. This is the fourth domino, the human capital hemorrhage. Since 2014, approximately 7.7 million Venezuelans have fled the country. That's roughly 25% of the entire population. Let me put that in context. Imagine if every single person in Texas just disappeared, or if the entire population of Switzerland packed up and left overnight. This is the largest refugee crisis in Western Hemisphere history, larger than the Syrian exodus at certain points. And unlike Syria, there were no bombs falling, there was no foreign invasion. The weapon was economic policy. And who left? Everyone. But specifically the people you absolutely need to run a functioning country: doctors, engineers, teachers, oil technicians, electricians, the educated middle class, the skilled workers who keep a modern economy running. Picture a hospital in Caracas in 2019. The power goes out because the electrical grid failed. We'll get to that nightmare. The backup generator doesn't work because the parts were stolen and sold on the black market. And the surgeon who was supposed to perform your operation, he's in Miami working as a dishwasher because his monthly surgeon salary in Venezuela dropped to $6. $6 for a surgeon per month. This is the hidden economic cost that sealed Maduro's fate. He didn't just lose money, he lost the brains to fix the money. When the oil rigs broke down, the engineers who knew how to repair them were in Houston. When the power grid collapsed, the electrical specialists were in Madrid. When hospitals needed doctors, they were in Bogotá or Lima or Santiago. Maduro was left ruling a country of ghosts, the elderly and the desperate. The desperation reached biblical proportions. Hundreds of thousands of people walked through the Darien Gap, one of the deadliest jungles on Earth, just for a chance to reach the U.S. border. They risked death, robbery, sexual assault, and disease because staying in Venezuela seemed worse. This mass exodus did two things economically. Initially, it relieved pressure, fewer mouths to feed, but eventually it humiliated the regime on the global stage. You can scream socialist paradise all you want, but when your quarter of your population would rather risk death in a jungle than stay in your paradise, the verdict is written in blood. Those millions of voices in the diaspora became the loudest lobby against Maduro. They were sending remittances back home, literally keeping their families alive with $20 wire transfers, while simultaneously begging the international community to intervene.
Imagine this scenario. You're in an elevator on the 20th floor, or riding a subway train deep underground, or you're a surgeon, scalpel in hand, mid-operation, and then click. Everything goes dark. In March 2019, Venezuela experienced the Great Blackout. The entire country went dark, not for a few hours, not for a day, for nearly a week. The Guri Dam, one of the world's largest hydroelectric facilities that supplies 80% of Venezuela's electricity, failed catastrophically. Maduro's explanation? A cyber attack orchestrated by the United States and Senator Marco Rubio. He literally claimed they hacked the dam from a laptop in Washington. Some officials even suggested electromagnetic weapons from outer space. But the engineers who remained in the country knew the truth. Decades of neglect. This is the fifth domino: infrastructure collapse. Remember those 20,000 fired oil workers? The same purge happened to electrical engineers and power plant operators. They stopped maintaining the substations. They stopped cutting grass around transformers, which led to fires.
They stopped replacing aging turbines. They let the entire system rot until it simply gave up. And it wasn't just the lights. When the power died, water pumps stopped. You're in a tropical country. It's 90 degrees Fahrenheit, no air conditioning, no fans, and now no water coming from the tap. People were seen scooping water from the Guaire River, a river so polluted it's basically liquid sewage, just to flush toilets or wash clothes. But the true horror unfolded in the hospitals. Neonatal incubators shut down. Dialysis machines stopped mid-treatment. Ventilators went silent. We will never know the exact death toll from those 5 days, but doctors reported patients dying simply because the machines keeping them alive had no power. This was the moment the economic crisis stopped being about statistics and became a direct physical threat to human life. The state had failed to provide the two most basic elements of civilization, light and water. And yet, in a twist of irony that would make a Hollywood screenwriter jealous, the regime found a way to adapt. They realized the Bolivar was dead. So to stay in power, they had to embrace the one thing they'd spent years demonizing, the US dollar. By 2020, Venezuela had become a surreal economic twilight zone. Walk down one street and you'd see people digging through garbage bags for scraps of food. Walk down the next street and you'd see a gleaming new boutique called a bodegon selling Nutella, Kirkland vitamins, PlayStation 5s, and imported champagne. This is the sixth domino, the zombie economy. After years of screaming "Yankee go home" and blaming the dollar for all his problems, Maduro did the unthinkable. He quietly legalized the US dollar. He stopped trying to control the exchange rate because he literally had no mechanism left to control it. He just let the dollar flow. Suddenly, Venezuela became a two-tier society. Tier 1, the 95% of people earning worthless bolivars, scraping by in poverty. Tier 2, the 5%, government cronies, military generals, drug traffickers, and people with family abroad sending dollars. This created a bizarre bubble of luxury in Caracas and other major cities. New restaurants opened with $100 steaks, casinos reopened, designer stores sold Gucci and Louis Vuitton. Instagram influencers started posting, "See, Venezuela is recovering." But it was a mirage built on quicksand. This wasn't a productive economy. There were no factories creating value, no farms producing food for export. It was an economy built on money laundering, drug trafficking proceeds, and remittances from the diaspora. The government wasn't generating wealth. They were washing dirty money through luxury imports. Before we continue with the next chapter, if you're finding this forensic investigation valuable, hit that like button. It tells YouTube this content matters and helps it reach more people. And subscribe if you want deep dives like this on the economics and geopolitics shaping our world. When the oil money dried up and the dollarized economy wasn't generating enough cash to maintain power, Maduro looked at a map of the Venezuelan Amazon, one of the most biodiverse regions on the planet, and said, "Dig it up." He created the Orinoco mining arc, Arco Minero, a zone bigger than Portugal, and opened it for gold extraction. But this wasn't industrial mining with environmental safeguards and safety standards. This was the Wild West with automatic weapons. This is the seventh domino, the gangster economy. The regime essentially handed control of these mines to a mixture of military units and actual criminal organizations, including Colombian guerrilla groups like the ELN. They use mercury, toxic, poisonous mercury, to separate gold from sediment. That mercury flows directly into rivers, poisoning water supplies for indigenous communities and killing fish that locals depend on for food. The gold gets flown out on private planes to Turkey, the UAE, or Iran. It's sold for cash, completely off the books, no receipts, no taxes, just duffel bags full of cash delivered to keep the inner circle loyal and the military paid. This is crucial to understand. By 2024-2025, Venezuela wasn't functioning as a state anymore. It was a criminal enterprise masquerading as a country. The economy wasn't based on GDP growth or productive output. It was based on extraction in the purest sense. Extract the remaining oil, extract the gold, extract money from desperate migrants, extract hope from the population. But even a criminal economy has limits. Eventually, you run out of things to steal and allies to protect you. Which brings us to the final act.
If you followed the news in late 2023 and early 2024, you might have heard whispers of optimism. Venezuela is stabilizing, some analysts said. Inflation had slowed slightly. Oil production had ticked up a bit because the U.S. had eased some sanctions, allowing Chevron to operate. There was even a deal on the table, the Barbados Agreement. The terms were simple. Hold a free and fair election in July 2024, and the international community would ease sanctions. Venezuela could finally sell oil again on global markets. The economy could breathe. July 28, 2024, Election Day. This is the eighth domino, the ego trap. The opposition candidate, Edmundo González Urrutia, didn't just win, he crushed it. Exit polls suggested a 70-30 split in many regions. Independent vote tallies collected by opposition observers showed an overwhelming victory. The people had spoken. Maduro had a choice. Option A, accept defeat, negotiate an amnesty deal for himself and his inner circle, retire to a comfortable exile in a friendly country with his millions, and let Venezuela recover. Option B, steal the election, refuse to show the voting tallies, arrest protesters, and doom the economy to eternal isolation. He chose option B. He announced he'd won. He refused to release detailed voting results. He sent security forces to arrest opposition leaders and protesters, and just like that, the economic lifeline was severed. The United States said, deals off. Sanctions snapped back. European investors who'd been cautiously exploring opportunities packed their bags and left. The brief window of economic recovery slammed shut. This is the moment the final verdict was truly signed. Because until 2024, Maduro could plausibly blame U.S. imperialism or sanctions for Venezuela's troubles. But in 2024, he was handed a golden key to unlock those sanctions, and he threw it into the ocean. He proved to the world, and more importantly, to his own military, that as long as he remained in power, Venezuela would never prosper again. He was the blockage in the pipe, the obstacle to recovery. And when a general can't pay his troops because the president has made the country radioactive to international business, that's when loyalty starts to crack.
Now we arrive at perhaps the darkest chapter of this economic autopsy. When the oil economy died and the gold economy wasn't generating enough cash, the state turned to the most profitable commodity in South America, cocaine. This is the ninth domino, the criminalization of the state. For years, U.S. investigators had been tracking something called the Cartel of the Suns, Cartel de los Soles. The name comes from the sun insignias worn by Venezuelan generals on their epaulets. The allegation, which became formal charges, is that the Venezuelan government essentially transformed into a logistics department for international drug trafficking. Think about the criminal brilliance of it. If you're a normal drug lord, you have to hide from police, bribe border agents, and dodge radar. But what if you are the police? What if you control the radar systems, the ports, the airports, and the airspace? It's the perfect crime. Cocaine flows from Colombia through Venezuela to Caribbean routes and onward to the U.S. and Europe. The military provides protection. Government officials provide documentation. Everyone gets a cut. But the catch is the economic catch. A narco-state is inherently unstable. It invites scrutiny and intervention. The U.S. Department of Justice stopped viewing Maduro as a political leader and started viewing him like El Chapo or Pablo Escobar. They put a $15 million bounty on his head. Think about the psychology of that. Every time Maduro walked into a room surrounded by bodyguards, he had to wonder, does that soldier want to protect me, or does he want $15 million? When the economy is bankrupt and soldiers' salaries are worthless, $15 million becomes very, very attractive. This criminal economy also isolated Venezuela completely on the international stage. Even traditional allies, China, Brazil, leftist governments in the region started distancing themselves. Nobody wants to do business with someone who has an active U.S. indictment hanging over their head. It's bad for diplomacy and worse for business.
History teaches us one undeniable lesson about dictatorships. You can survive being hated. You can survive sanctions. You can even survive a coup attempt or two. But you cannot survive when your own bodyguards realize they have a better future without you. Why did it happen now? Why January 2026? Because the economic math finally hit zero. Reports suggest that in the final months of 2025, cash payments to top military brass started arriving late, or they were lighter than expected. The gold mine revenues were being squeezed, drug trafficking routes were being disrupted by more aggressive U.S. interdiction efforts. The loot was running out. And that brings us to the ultimate economic concept, incentive structures. For over a decade, the incentive for military leaders was simple: protect Maduro, get paid, stay safe. In January 2026, that incentive flipped. Protecting Maduro meant going down with a sinking ship. Handing him over meant the possibility of immunity deals, keeping some of the wealth, maybe even political rehabilitation. When the operation happened on January 3rd, reports suggest there wasn't a fierce last stand by thousands of fanatical troops. There was a regime that had already hollowed itself out from within. The structure was rotten. One push, and it all came tumbling down. The economy didn't just weaken Maduro, it stripped him of his shield. It turned him from a strongman into a liability. His own allies made the calculation that he was worth to them in custody than in power. So here we are. Nicolás Maduro sits in a detention facility in Brooklyn, and the world is watching. But let's be absolutely clear about what actually defeated him. It wasn't just military force, it wasn't just political pressure. It was a fundamental refusal to accept economic reality. He thought he could print wealth. He couldn't. He thought he could ignore the laws of supply and demand. He couldn't. He thought he could rule over economic ruins forever while maintaining an army's loyalty. He couldn't. Here is the final bill of the Maduro era. 1. GDP collapsed by nearly 80%, one of the worst economic contractions in peacetime history. 2. At its peak, over 90% of the population lived in poverty. 3. Nearly 8 million people, 25% of the entire country, forced into exile. 4. A currency so worthless it literally ceased to exist as a functional medium of exchange. There will be trials. There will be lawyers arguing over jurisdiction and charges. There will be headlines about justice and accountability. But there is no courtroom large enough to hold the true scale of suffering inflicted on the Venezuelan people. You cannot sue for a lost decade. You cannot get a refund on a stolen childhood. You cannot put a price on the empty chairs at dinner tables where 8 million people once sat. You cannot compensate parents who watch their children go hungry, or families torn apart by forced migration. The economy that destroyed Maduro also crucified the Venezuelan people. He may be gone, the nightmare may be ending, but the recovery, the rebuilding of a shattered nation, that's going to be the hardest work of all. Venezuela is free of the man. Now it must free itself from the wreckage he left behind. The lights need to come back on. The infrastructure needs to be rebuilt. Most importantly, trust needs to be restored. Trust in institutions, trust in a currency, trust in the future. If you found this deep dive valuable, make sure you hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who need to understand what really happened here. Subscribe for more forensic investigations into the economics and geopolitics that shape our world. And drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think Venezuela's recovery will look like? What lessons should other nations learn from this collapse? I'll see you in the next one. And remember, economics isn't just about numbers and charts. Economics is about human lives, human dignity, and human futures. The collapse of an economy is the collapse of hope. The rebuilding of an economy is the rebirth of possibility. The verdict is in. Now comes the recovery, and that story is just beginning.